After the tragic and unexpected death of Sergio, a man in his late 50s, his family found themselves faced not only with the pain of loss, but also with a shocking discovery that changed their lives forever. Before continuing, subscribe to our channel and activate the bell. Sergio, a computer engineer, was a constant and loving presence in the lives of his wife Julia and their daughter Aurora, a little girl of just 7 years. But his sudden death in a car accident left a void that seemed impossible to fill. The day of the funeral was a surreal experience for Julia and Aurora. The church was full of friends and family, but for the two of them, it felt empty. Julia, a woman with dark hair and sad eyes, looked at Sergio's coffin with a blank stare, unable to accept the reality of what had happened. She couldn't understand how their life had been destroyed in an instant. Next to her, Aurora, with her brown hair loose and her lost gaze, clung to her mother, unable to stop crying. Her father, her point of reference, was no longer there. Everything she knew had been swept away. After the funeral, the house suddenly seemed cold and lifeless. Every room, every object seemed to scream Sergio's absent presence. Her shoes were still by the door, her perfume was in the air, and her laptop was still open on the desk. Julia tried desperately to maintain a sense of normalcy for Aurora's sake, but the weight of mourning was oppressive. Every daily gesture, every breath seemed to require an immense effort. The days passed, and while Julia struggled to move forward, Aurora was driven by an inexplicable curiosity. The little girl, even though she didn't fully understand the extent of the tragedy that had struck her family, felt that there was something unsaid, something hidden. So, one afternoon, she decided to venture into her father's room, looking for something that could help her feel closer to him. As she tidied up her father's desk, Aurora noticed a slightly open drawer. Curiosity made her peek inside. Without thinking too much, she opened the drawer and discovered Sergio's cell phone, still on. Her small hands trembled as they scrolled across the screen, going from family photos to conversations that seemed trivial. But then something caught her attention, a conversation with a woman she didn't know. Her name was Marta. Aurora, increasingly curious, began to read the messages between her father and Marta. At first, the words seemed friendly, like between colleagues or friends. But as she read the lines, the tones became more personal, more intimate. Among those messages, an unknown name also appeared, Matteo. Who was Matteo? And why did his father talk so much about him? Aurora couldn't fully understand the meaning of what she had read, but a deep sense of unease began to grow inside her. She didn't know what to do. She decided to hide the phone under her pillow, unable to understand the weight of the discovery she had just made. In the days that followed, the image of her father as a perfect and loving man began to waver in her mind. Every time she saw her mother, she felt guilty for not telling her about the discovery, but she was afraid of hurting her even more. The tension inside her grew. Aurora was just a child, and the weight of the secret she carried inside became more and more unbearable. One afternoon, while Julia was sitting in the living room, Aurora slowly approached with her cell phone in her hand. "Mom, can I talk to you?" she asked in a thin voice, full of uncertainty. Julia, seeing the seriousness in her daughter's eyes, closed the book she was reading and looked at her worriedly. "Of course, love. What's happening?" Aurora took a deep breath and handed her phone to her mother. "I found this. It's Dad's phone. There are some messages from a woman named Marta, and they talk about a boy named Matteo. I don't understand." Julia took the phone with shaking hands, trying to stay calm. She began reading the messages, and as the words scrolled across the screen, her face transformed. The conversations between Sergio and Marta revealed a relationship that Julia had never imagined. The words exchanged between them indicated that Marta was not just a friend or a colleague, and Matteo was not just an acquaintance. Matteo was Sergio's son. The pain, the shock, and the betrayal hit Julia like a punch in the stomach. She tried not to collapse in front of Aurora, but inside her there was total chaos. Julia looked at Aurora with eyes full of confusion and pain. "Honey, thank you for telling me," she said, in a voice that she tried to keep calm. "I need to understand what all this means." Aurora nodded, but she felt that something had changed, that an uncomfortable truth had been revealed, and nothing would ever be the same again. That night, after Aurora went to sleep, Julia sat at her desk, rereading every message between Sergio and Marta. Every word was a stab to the heart. Questions piled up in her mind. Who was Marta really? Why had Sergio hidden all this from her? Who was Matteo? Determined to find out the truth, Julia decided to act. The next morning, she contacted Marta. She wrote her a short but direct message. "I'm Julia, Sergio's wife. We need to talk." Marta's response came almost immediately, and she agreed to meet her. Julia knew the truth would be painful, but she was determined to find out everything. On the day of the meeting, Julia was a bundle of nerves. They met in a bar in the city center. When Marta entered, Julia looked at her carefully. She was a woman in her 40s, with a tense expression. They sat down opposite each other, and after a few moments of silence, Marta broke the ice. "I knew about you," Marta said calmly. "When I found out, I was already pregnant with Matteo. Sergio told me about you, but he always tried to keep our lives separate." Julia felt her world collapse. Marta's words were a hard blow to digest. "He had a son with you," Julia whispered, trying to hold back tears. "And he never told me." Marta looked down. "I know it's hard to accept, but Sergio was confused. He always told me he loved both families and didn't know how to handle the situation." Julia felt suffocated by the pain, but she knew she had to move on. "And now, what happens?" Marta looked into her eyes. "Matteo and Aurora also have the right to know that they are brothers. We can no longer hide the truth." Back home, Julia thought about how to deal with her new reality. She knew that sooner or later she would have to talk to Aurora, and that Matteo would have to come into their lives. In the days that followed, she found the courage to talk about it with her daughter. One afternoon, while they were sitting on the couch, Julia took a breath and said, "Aurora, we need to talk about Matteo. He's your brother. I think it's right that you two get to know each other." Aurora listened in silence, then nodded slowly. "Okay, Mom, I'm ready." The day of the meeting arrived. Julia organized everything with Marta and Matteo. Aurora was nervous, but determined. When Matteo arrived, the two boys looked at each other with curiosity and shyness. "Ciao," Aurora said in a low voice. Matteo smiled at her. Slowly, they began to talk, to get to know each other, while Julia and Marta observed the scene from a distance. As Julia watched her daughter and Matteo laugh together, she realized that, despite everything, there was hope. The pain and betrayal still hurt, but the boys had a bond that needed to be nurtured. A new chapter opened for them, and even though it would be difficult, they knew they could build a different future, one of truth, reconciliation, and new possibilities. Did you like this story? Leave a comment below. Thanks for watching the video till the end, and see you next story.